Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 40 of the Rickenbacker 620/12 string build. And in this episode we're going to be tackling one of the really tricky bits of this build, and that is getting this 12 string nut sorted out. And I'm going to be really honest about this aspect of the build, and I just haven't been looking forward to it. It's been worrying me for weeks, mainly because it's something I've never done before, and also because the nut is such an important part of the guitar that kind of any error can render it unplayable. So I really need to get this right. In terms of the overall build, it might be a 12 string, but there's very little difference really between a 6 string and a 12 string, other than the extra tuners on the headstock, some work with the bridge, and of course the nut. So the rest of the build has been relatively straightforward for me, but this is the point where the differences really kick in, and we have to do some stuff that certainly I've never done before, and there isn't a huge amount of information out there on the internet either, so I'm kind of got a couple of references that I'm working from, but I'm also going to be making up quite a lot of stuff as I go along. Now, as I said, I've done a little bit of research into how to do this job, and I came across 2 videos in particular that had some very useful information. I'll probably put links in the description to both of them. There was one that described one method of setting up an acoustic 12 string nut, and whilst it was very good, it was quite technical and there was a lot of maths involved, and it looked a very complex way of doing things, but to be fair, he got some good results. The other one was from Dave's World of Fun Stuff, and although there was a few issues with the way he went about it initially, he did get there in the end, and it was on a Rickenbacker. So I'm going to work mainly from that one, but I will pull elements of the other method as well. So to start, I'm going to zoom in onto the headstock end and then have a look at the bone nut blank that I've got and start to get that prepared. So to start off with, I've got this little bit of bone. It's just about big enough, I think. Potentially could have been doing with a little bit bigger, but it's kind of the only bit that I've got that's anywhere near the size that I need it to be. And it slopes away on this edge a little bit. So realistically, I need to put that edge against the fretboard. Now, what I've seen of people doing this actually works a little bit in my favour, because what I don't really want is to be cutting the slots too deep into here, because these slots, as we'll discover in a bit, need to be very close together, and this bone can be quite fragile. And when I was watching Dave's video, he actually snapped a little piece off on his first attempt and had to start again. So my theory here is, if I can get this very close to where it actually needs to be in terms of height, it means I'm only going to be putting in the bare minimum of cuts into the top of it to hold the strings in place, and that will vastly reduce my risk of the thing breaking on me. So to start with, we'll do, as I kind of always do in this situation, is I'm going to use my half pencil to draw the line that represents where the tops of the frets are. And you can see I've got a little bit of excess there. So I'll get this onto the disc sander and we'll just get that sanded roughly to shape, and then we can move forward from there. And with that kind of sanded down roughly where we need it to be, I'm just going to take a file and just work the back edge down a little bit. Just put a little bit of a chamfer onto that so that it's falling away. Roughly the same as the break angle on the headstock. I think that's good enough. Okay, and with that done, we can now start to roughly lay out where we want these strings to be. Now, there are a couple of factors that come into play here, given that this is a Rickenbacker, because not all 12 strings are strung up the same way. Or rather, most 12 strings are strung up in one way, and then Rickenbackers are strung up in a different way. Most 12 strings will have the octave up string above the main string, whereas a Rickenbacker has it below. And that does feed into how we're going to cut this nut. Now, there's nothing to say that I couldn't do it the normal way, but apparently from what I understand and what I've read, it will affect the tone of the guitar, and I want this to sound kind of as much like a Rickenbacker as I can. So I will string it up the Rickenbacker way. And realistically what that means is, and this might be a little bit hard to explain, so you might need to bear with me a little bit, but it's not just a case of marking the nut up for 6 strings as you normally would, and then adding another 6 slots in the appropriate position. Because if you think about it, if we've got our octave up strings below the main strings, at the bass end, it's going to be inboard of the fretboard, but on the treble end, it's going to be right at the edge. So to make that work, the way I've got it in my head anyway, is that we need to mark the position, the 2 outside strings, the bottom one of which will be the octave up string. From there, we need to mark up the required amount, which will be the main top E string. And then from that mark and the mark at the bass end of the fretboard, we can then take the fret slotting ruler and mark out the 6 main string positions. And then from there, we'll be able to mark up and cut the octave up strings. It sounds very, very complicated, and I'm not entirely sure that it's going to work until I start to work my way through it, but I'm pretty confident that we can get there in the end. So to start the process off, we need to mark those 2 outside string positions. And to do that, I've got this little sliding square, and I'm going to set that up just a hair inside where the chamfer on the end of this fret is. I'm going to temporarily glue this nut into position, and then we can use that to establish where the very outside strings need to be. And then with that done, I can just line that up with my square, make a little mark, extend them across there as best as I can. And those are my 2 outside string locations. Now what I need to do is find out how wide this slot needs to be from the set of strings. Cut a little shallow slot in initially so that I can get a stop in. I'll probably use a feeler gauge. And then I've got this little stack of feeler gauges set up to the exact distance between the strings, and that is the same across all of the pair of strings that we're going to be putting in. Luckily, when I was watching the Dave's World of Fun Stuff video, he measured the Rickenbacker that he had in, and the gap between the string stacks was 5/64s, which I've translated into a language I can understand, and that comes out at 1.98 millimeters. This is 1.9 millimeters, and that'll leave me a little bit of wriggle room. And what the strings tell me is that both of this pair of strings are actually 9 gauge. So I haven't got a 9 gauge nut file, but I have got a 10. So I'm just going to put a very shallow slot in there. And you have to be quite careful with these, because these thin ones especially, very bendy. And I'm going to angle this back as much as possible, so I'm only just going to kind of score the surface at the front there. I haven't got an awful lot of room on this nut, so I can't really mess around too much. And then with that done, I'm going to take this feeler gauge blade that will fit into that slot. I'm going to take my little stack of gauges and hold them against there. This is going to be impossible to film, but you'll get the gist. And then I'm just going to use that as a fence to start my next slot, like that. And again, I'm going to be going backwards at an angle. And that is the slot I'm going to use to position my ruler. So I'm just going to go through this now and find a position on the string spacing ruler that matches those 2 positions and get the rest of those strings marked out. Okay, so there's the 6 positions marked out. So with that done, I can now start to get those cut in, starting with the base E string, which is a 46 gauge. Again, I'm just going to kiss the front of the nut there. We can always take these down a bit further if we need to, but we can't really put bone back in. So next up, 36. $26. We've got 28, that will do. $20, which is a wound string in this set. That'll be a bit different for me, but I don't think I'm going to be doing much string bending, to be honest. Then we need 12. So that's my 6 main strings sorted out. So next up, what I need to do is work my way back up and get in the secondary strings. So same trick, I'm just going to use that as a spacer. And I'm starting at an angle, cutting right into that corner there. And when I've established that, I can take that lot away. Cut the rest of the slot in. Now luckily, I've not cut that slot in too deep, because of course I've cut it the wrong side of the slot, haven't I? So I'm hoping that we can polish that out. We still need to take some material off the back edge here, and hopefully I've not gone down too deep there, because of course what I needed to do was actually go that way. What an idiot. I'm sure it'll be fine in the long run, but I'm glad I caught myself before I did them all that way. Okay, so the next one is actually a 20 gauge string in there, but its octave up string is a 9. That seems really weird to me. You go 9, 9, 12, whatever that string is, and then back up to a 9 here, but I'm sure Ernie Ball know more about 12 strings than I do, so I'll trust to that. And then it's just a matter of working your way up the rest of these until you've got them all cut in. Okay, and that is the 12 string positions at least marked into the nut, and the additional 13th one, which I'm hoping we'll be able to get rid of. Okay, so next job is I'm just going to mark roughly where we need this to begin and end, and then I'll just take a little block of wood and very gently just knock that off, and we can get that back to the disc sander and back into the vise and start to shape it up a little bit more how we want it. Okay, so I've cleaned this all up now and it's kind of ready for polishing, but I haven't really been able to get rid of this slot that I erroneously cut in there. So I'm going to have a go at filling it up. So I'll just mask everything else off so I know I'm not filling the wrong one. And all I'm going to do, I've just dropped in some baking soda and I'm going to add to that just a little drop of water thin super glue. This is a semi-good trick if you overcut a nut slot and you're in a bit of a pinch and you don't have time to make a new nut or source a new nut. You can actually kind of fill that slot up using this method. And it is fairly robust. It will do the trick, but it's not as good as the real thing. So we'll just let that set up a little bit and we can clean it off and see how it looks. Okay, and while that might not have kind of totally disappeared, I think it's good enough. You can barely see it. So next thing, break out the Dremel and just give this a little bit of a polish up. Okay, and there we have it, all cut, finished off, and I actually think that looks okay. You can just about still see that slot we cut in error, but the rest of it looks very nicely evenly spaced, and I think we shouldn't have any problem at all with that working. Obviously these slots have hardly been cut in at all on that front face. I am aware that there isn't a great deal of room to spare, so I've left them a little bit shy, and then when it comes time to string this thing up, we can actually cut whatever we need to away from those front faces just to give us that absolutely perfect nut angle. But I'm really happy with that. It's polished up nicely, which will give us a nice smooth finish. And I think that's important because you want your nut to feel like it's not there. So when you're playing the guitar, there's no sharp edges, it's nice and smooth, and it almost kind of disappears and you're not aware of it. So yeah, happy days. Another job jobbed. And the one I was really not looking forward to, hopefully, has gone okay. So with that out of the way, we can head back down the other end of the guitar and start to finish off some of the little jobs that need doing down there. However, I think we've covered enough this time, so that'll be for the next episode. So as always, like if you've liked, smash that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.